Hello. After a long and exhausting day, it's time to slow down, clear your mind, and let the outside world gradually fade away. Find a comfortable place, dim the lights, and allow yourself to relax as tonight's dark and mysterious stories begin. Just remember, some stories stay with you long after the night is over. The first time the old call light came on, I was standing alone at the nurse's station with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. It was 3:11 in the morning. I remember the time because I had just signed a medication record, and the clock above the desk was directly in front of me. The floor was quiet except for the oxygen concentrator in room 206 and the low hum of the ice machine near the elevators. Then a small amber square lit up on the wall behind me. It said 212B. That should have been impossible. There was no room 212B anymore. I started working nights at Blackwater County Memorial in northern West Virginia in the winter of 2016. I was 38 then, old enough to have stopped pretending I liked night shift and young enough to keep volunteering for it anyway. Nights paid a little more, and after my divorce I needed the extra money. They also gave me a kind of silence I had come to depend on. Blackwater was a small county hospital that had been renovated in pieces over several decades. The front lobby had new tile and bright glass doors, but the second floor still had narrow hallways, low ceilings, and radiator covers painted the color of old teeth. Half of the building felt modern. The other half felt as if someone had simply stopped changing it. The nurse's station still had an old call light repeater mounted on the wall beside the newer computer display. Most of its little plastic windows had gone cloudy with age. The maintenance department had disconnected it years earlier, or so everyone said. Nobody had bothered to remove it because taking it out would have meant opening the wall. Room 212B had disappeared during a renovation in the late 90s. Two small patient rooms had been combined with a storage alcove to make a larger linen room. By the time I worked there, the old doorway was gone. The number existed only on that dead panel. When the amber light came on, I stared at it for several seconds. I didn't hear a chime. There was no alert on the computer, just that dim square of yellow light. I walked over and pressed the little reset button beneath it. Nothing happened. The light stayed on. I called over to Denise Mercer, the other nurse on the floor. She was in room 210 helping a patient back into bed. When she came out, I pointed at the panel. She looked at 212B, then at me. "That thing still works?" she asked. I thought it didn't. It doesn't. Denise pressed the reset button harder than I had. The light remained steady. We stood there listening to the building. Then, from farther down the hall, a man called weakly for help. It was Mr. Ralston in room 203. His call button had slipped between the mattress and the rail, and he couldn't reach it. He wasn't in immediate danger. He only needed help getting to the bathroom. Still, he had been calling for several minutes, and neither of us had heard him until that moment. When we came back to the nurse's station, the amber light was off. Denise shrugged and said, "Old wiring could do strange things in winter." The building was dry, the air was cold, and the heating system caused little electrical problems all the time. That explanation was good enough for me. I had become very skilled at accepting good enough explanations. My father had died in that hospital 7 years earlier. We had not been getting along at the time. Our last conversation had ended with both of us saying things we probably expected to take back later. When he was admitted with chest pain, my sister called me twice. I was working at a rehabilitation center outside Morgantown and told myself I would drive over after my shift. He died before morning. For years, I reduced that night to a series of practical facts. I had been working. The weather had been bad. My father had been stable when my sister first called. Nobody knew he would decline that quickly. Those things were true. They just weren't the whole truth. The amber light came on again 3 nights later. This time it was 2:46. I was charting at the desk while Denise was on break downstairs. The light appeared without a sound, as if it had been waiting for me to look away. 212B. I pressed the reset button once, then I walked the floor. In room 207, Mrs. Baines was sleeping with the television on low. Room 208 was empty. In 210, a man recovering from pneumonia was breathing evenly. I checked every room because I could think of nothing else to do. At the end of the hall, I found Mrs. Henley in 215 sitting on the edge of her bed. She was 81 and had been admitted after a minor fall. She looked embarrassed when I entered. "I didn't want to bother anybody," she said. Her walker was across the room where a day shift aide had left it. She had been trying to reach it on her own. I moved it beside her bed and stayed until she was settled again. When I returned to the desk, the light was dark. That bothered me more than if it had stayed on. The next morning, I asked maintenance about the panel. A man named Curtis came upstairs with a screwdriver and a small meter. He removed the metal plate, looked behind it, and frowned. "There's no live feed to this," he said. He showed me 2 clipped wires tucked inside the wall. "Could it hold a charge?" I asked. "Not for 20 years. He smiled when he said it, but he did not put the cover back on right away. For the next week, nothing happened. I began to feel foolish for thinking about it. Then we had a night when freezing rain came down so hard that the parking lot disappeared under a sheet of glass. 2 nurses called out. An aide got stuck on the highway. By midnight, we were short everywhere. Around 3, Denise was helping downstairs, and I had 6 patients, mostly to myself. At 3:11, the amber light came on. I remember feeling irritated before I felt afraid. I said, "Not tonight," out loud. The hallway answered with silence. I kept charting. Less than a minute later, the light went off. Then, it came back on. Off. On. Slowly. Deliberately. I stood up. That was when I noticed room 206 was too quiet. Mr. Keene had a concentrator that made a constant soft mechanical hum. I had heard it all night without paying attention to it. Now the sound was gone. I found him awake, breathing shallowly, with the nasal tubing pulled loose, and the concentrator unplugged from the wall. He told me later he had reached for his water and caught the cord with his foot. He had tried to call out, but his voice was too weak. He was all right once I got the oxygen running again. Back at the desk, 212B was dark. I didn't tell Denise what had happened. I told myself there was no reason to make it into something larger than it was, but I started paying attention. Over the next month, the light came on 4 more times. Once, it led me to a patient whose IV pump had stopped alarming even though the line was occluded. Once, it came on while an elderly man was quietly trying to climb over his bed rail. Another time, nothing seemed wrong until I noticed a woman in room 212 had been given a dinner tray containing a food listed prominently among her allergies. She had not touched it yet. The 4th time, I found nothing at all. I checked every patient twice. The light stayed on for nearly 10 minutes, then faded by itself. That was the night I finally went looking for old records. Blackwater kept retired maintenance binders and floor plans in a basement records room that smelled like paper dust and concrete. During a quiet hour after sunrise, I asked our unit clerk, Marcy, whether she knew where the renovation documents were stored. She found a binder marked 2nd floor south, 1998. The original floor plan showed 212B exactly where the linen room stood now. It had been a patient room, not a storage alcove. I stared at the little rectangle on the page longer than I should have. Marcy noticed. "You okay?" she asked. I told her I was just curious about the old panel. She flipped through the binder and found a stack of work orders. One of them, dated November 1998, mentioned removing the call system from rooms 210 through 214 during construction. Someone had written a note in blue ink across the bottom. "Leave 2212B indicator in place until final census audit is complete." There was no explanation of what that meant. Marcy read it twice. "Census audit," she said. "That's probably just paperwork." Probably. Before I closed the binder, a loose photocopy slipped out from between the pages. It was a handwritten night census from 1997. The names were old, but the format was familiar. Room number, patient, admitting physician, status. My eyes went straight to 212B. The patient listed there was Thomas Marlowe, my father. For a moment I thought I had misunderstood the year. My father had died in 2009, not 1997. Then I looked closer. The line had been added in different ink. Next to his name was the date, February 12, 2009. I felt the room become strangely small. Marcy asked if the name was someone I knew. I told her it was my father. She stopped smiling. We took the page upstairs to medical records. A supervisor named Glenn pulled my father's archive chart after I signed the family access paperwork. His final admission had been on the second floor, but the room number on the discharge summary was 210A. Then Glenn found an internal transfer sheet. At 2:58 in the morning, my father had been moved temporarily because of a plumbing leak. The destination was handwritten, 212B. The room had supposedly ceased to exist more than 10 years earlier. Glenn studied the form and shook his head. That room wasn't there in 2009, he said. I know. He checked the nurse's signature. The name belonged to a woman who had retired several years earlier. I found her through Denise, who knew someone, the way people do in small counties. Her name was Lorraine Pike. She agreed to speak with me by phone. When I asked about 212B, she became quiet. Then she said, "That light still coming on?" I didn't answer immediately. Lorraine told me nurses had noticed it after the renovation. Not often. Sometimes months would pass. The old indicator would come on even after maintenance disconnected the panel. Whenever it did, one of the nurses would walk the floor. "Did it point to anything?" I asked. "Not exactly." "What do you mean?" "It came on when somebody was being missed." She said it without drama. A patient who had slipped down in bed. Someone whose call cord was out of reach. A confused man standing in the bathroom without his walker. Once, years earlier, a woman who had simply been lying awake crying because nobody had visited her. I asked about my father. Lorraine took a long breath. "He wasn't moved to 212B, she said. There was no 212B. We used that number on paper when we had to keep somebody near the station and didn't have a clean bed ready. Your dad was in a recliner behind the old privacy wall for maybe 20 minutes. Why would his name be on a census from 1997? I can't explain that." "Were you with him when he died?" Another pause. "No," she said. "I wish I had been. My father had asked twice whether my sister had reached me." Lorraine remembered because he had kept his cell phone on his chest. The last call on that phone had been to me. I had let it ring. After that conversation, I stopped trying to explain the light as an electrical fault. I also stopped thinking of it as a warning. A warning tells you what will happen. The light only seemed to tell us what we had failed to notice. That distinction mattered a few weeks later when a man named Walter Vance was admitted with end-stage lung disease. Walter was 76, widowed, and tired in a way that medication could not fix. His daughter was driving in from Ohio, but an accident on the interstate had backed traffic up for miles. She called twice asking us to tell him she was coming. Near 3 in the morning, Walter's breathing changed. The doctor had already discussed what to expect. There was nothing sudden or violent about it. The room simply grew quieter around him. At 3:11, 212B lit up. I was behind on charting. Another patient needed antibiotics. Denise was helping with an admission. Every practical part of me said to keep moving. Then the light went off. A few seconds later, it came on again. I thought about my father with his phone on his chest. I called downstairs and asked the house supervisor to cover the antibiotic for me. She sounded annoyed, but she agreed. Then I went into Walter's room and sat beside him. He was awake. I told him his daughter was still on the road and that she had called. He nodded once. For a while, we listened to the freezing rain tapping against the window. He asked me whether I thought people knew when someone was trying to get back to them. I said I hoped so. It was not a medical answer. It was the only one I had. Walter died a little after 4. His daughter arrived 23 minutes later. I stayed with her until morning. When I finally returned to the nurse's station, the amber square for 212B was dark. It did not come on again during the remaining 2 years I worked at Blackwater County Memorial. The hospital closed the old south wing in 2019. Most of the second floor was eventually gutted, including the nurses' station and the wall where the call light panel had been mounted. I left nursing not long after that. I still work in healthcare, but I no longer take overnight shifts. For a long time, I told myself the light had stopped because whatever faulty connection caused it had finally failed. That explanation is still available to me, and some days I use it. But I kept the photocopy of the 1997 night census. It is folded inside an envelope with my father's old discharge papers. A few months ago, I opened it for the first time in years. His name was still written beside 212B. Under it, in blue ink I do not remember seeing before, were 3 words. Someone came back. For 6 months I thought the service corridor behind the laboratory was simply longer at night. That sounds ridiculous when I say it now. A hallway is a hallway. It has a fixed beginning, a fixed end, and whatever distance the architect gave it when the building was put up. But during the summer I worked nights at Red Basin Regional Hospital in central Utah. There were certain hours when that corridor seemed to forget those rules. I first noticed it because of my shoes. I was 42 and working as an overnight phlebotomist, which meant I spent most of my shift walking. The laboratory sat near the back of the first floor. Medical surgical was on the opposite side of the hospital, and the quickest route between them was a narrow service corridor used mostly by staff, supply carts, and housekeeping. I knew that corridor well enough to cross it half asleep. From the lab door to the double doors beside the medication room, it took me 87 steps. I had counted them during a slow shift the week I started. The first time it took more than that was a little after 2 in the morning in August of 2017. Rain had started just after midnight. The parking lot lights shimmered through water running down the windows, and every few minutes distant thunder rolled across the high desert without ever sounding close. I was carrying a tray with 6 labeled tubes for morning draws when I went through the lab door and started down the service corridor. At step 87, I was nowhere near the double doors. They were still ahead of me. Not far, maybe another 30 feet. I stopped and looked behind me. The lab door seemed farther away too. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I had entered the wrong corridor. Red Basin had been expanded twice, and parts of the building had the same beige walls, the same gray vinyl baseboards, and the same square fluorescent lights. Then I saw the dent in the wall where a laundry cart had hit it the month before. I was exactly where I thought I was. I kept walking. It took 114 steps to reach the double doors. On the other side, everything looked normal. The nurses at the station were discussing a patient who refused to keep his oxygen cannula on. A television murmured from a room nearby. Someone had left half a cinnamon roll on a paper plate beside the copier. I asked one of the nurses, Kara, whether maintenance had moved the lab doors during the renovation. She stared at me. Moved them where? I laughed and told her I was tired. By the time I walked back, the corridor was 87 steps again. That should have ended it. I worked nights. I slept badly during the day. I drank too much coffee and sometimes went 10 hours without seeing sunlight. The human brain is good at turning fatigue into certainty. I knew that. So I did not mention the hallway again. The second time the corridor changed was 9 nights later. At 2:22, the lab printer started producing orders for morning blood work. I loaded my tray and went out. The hallway looked ordinary. I decided not to count. Halfway down, I passed the red fire extinguisher cabinet. Then I passed it again. I stopped. The second cabinet had the same scratch across the glass and the same inspection sticker with one corner peeling loose. There should have been only one. I turned around. Behind me, 20 feet away, was another red cabinet. I stood there long enough for the fluorescent lights to click softly above me. Then a cart rolled through the double doors at the far end. It was Luis from housekeeping. He pushed a stack of folded blankets toward me and nodded. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at the 2 extinguisher cabinets. There was only one. I asked Luis whether he had seen anything strange. He glanced at the ceiling. "Besides the lights?" I told him never mind. That night I measured the corridor with my phone. Not precisely. I used a walking distance app while moving from one end to the other 3 times. Each result was close enough to 90 feet that I felt embarrassed. After that, I carried a yellow tape measure. At 2:16 on a Monday morning, it stretched. This time I knew before I counted. The ceiling lights looked farther apart. The hum from the medication room seemed thin and distant. Even the floor under my shoes had a slightly different sound, less hollow than usual. I started counting anyway. 87, 100, 112. At 123 steps, I reached a section of wall I had never seen before. There was no door. There was a window. It was narrow and rectangular, set high in the wall, with wired glass. On the other side was a dim room. I could make out a row of metal bassinets. I did not go closer. I knew enough about Red Basin to know it had not delivered babies in more than 20 years. The obstetrics unit had closed before I graduated high school. What remained of it had been converted into administrative offices on the 2nd floor. There had never been a nursery beside the laboratory. I backed away from the window. The lights above me flickered once. When they came back steady, the window was gone. The double doors to medical surgical stood less than 10 feet away. I walked through them and found Kara at the nurse's station. I asked her a question I tried to make casual. Was the nursery ever down by the lab? She stopped typing. Kara had worked at Red Basin for almost 30 years. She was the kind of nurse who remembered which surgeon used to smoke behind the loading dock and which patient rooms had once been offices. No, she said. Nursery was upstairs. Always? As long as this building has been here. I told her what I had seen. She did not laugh. She asked what time it happened. When I said around 2:16, she rubbed the side of her thumb with her index finger, a nervous habit I had seen her use when talking to difficult families. Then she said, "You should ask facilities for the original plans." That was all. The next morning, before I went home, I found Tom Avery in the maintenance shop. He had worked for the hospital since the early 80s and seemed to know every pipe, breaker, and patched section of concrete by memory. When I described the extra window, he looked irritated. Not surprised. I asked him what that meant. He told me the current hospital had been built in 1974, but it had replaced a smaller county hospital that stood on almost the same site. For about 18 months, the old and new buildings had operated at the same time. A temporary enclosed passage had connected them. Where? I asked. Tom pulled an old plan from a flat drawer. The passage ran from the rear of the new laboratory to the west side of the old hospital. I looked at the line on the paper. It followed the same direction as our service corridor, then continued nearly 60 feet farther. What was at the other end? Tom hesitated. The old maternity ward. I remember hearing the ventilation fan above us. Nothing else. He said the old building had been demolished in 1976. The passage was sealed and later shortened when the new hospital expanded. I asked whether anyone else had ever noticed the corridor changing. Tom folded the plan slowly. Night people say things. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I have. Before I left, he told me something else. During demolition, workers had found sections of the temporary passage that did not match the plans. One wall was farther north than it should have been. Nobody knew whether the original measurements were wrong or whether changes had been made without documentation. Then, on September 9th, the hospital admitted an elderly woman named June Ellison after she became dehydrated at home. I first saw her during a blood draw just after midnight. She was 79, sharp-minded, and angry about being in the hospital. She complained about the coffee, the pillows, and the fact that her son lived in Idaho and would not be able to drive down until the weekend. When I tied the tourniquet around her arm, she looked at my badge. "Mara Cole," she said. "That's me." She studied my face. "Cole, your married name?" "No." I smiled because older patients often asked personal questions. She kept looking at me. "Were you born here?" The question made my hands slow. I think so. You think so? I was adopted. June turned her head toward the dark window. Then she said a name. Maribel. I asked what she meant. She apologized and said she had mistaken me for someone else. I finished the draw and went back to the lab. The name stayed with me. At 2:18, I went out again for a timed blood test. The corridor was already long. I could see the nursery window from the lab door. This time I walked toward it. I took out the tape measure and let the blade run as I walked. The air became colder as I moved. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed the skin on my forearms tighten. Behind the wired glass, the room was clearer than before. There were 6 bassinets. 5 were empty. The 6th stood beneath a small wall lamp. A white card was clipped to the end. I could not read it through the glass. There was no handle on my side of the window and no door nearby. I put my hand against the glass. The room beyond it smelled faintly of powder and old disinfectant. Then I heard a baby cry. Only once. A short, tired sound. The lights flickered. The corridor snapped back to its normal length so abruptly that I had to catch myself against the wall. The window was gone. The tape measure had slipped from my hand and lay on the floor at my feet. The yellow blade had been pulled out to 58 feet. The next morning, I asked medical records whether they kept birth ledgers from the old hospital. The clerk told me anything from before the new building opened had been transferred to county archives years earlier. I almost let it go. Instead, I drove to the county administration building after sleeping 4 hours. The archive room was in the basement. A woman named Elaine helped me find a box of maternity registers from 1974 and 1975. I did not know my birth name. All I knew was my birthday. There were 4 girls born at the old county hospital that day. 3 went home with named mothers. The 4th entry had been written differently. Infant female. Mother, Maribel R. Disposition, transferred to county care. I read the line several times. Elaine asked whether I needed a chair. I told her I was fine. I was not fine, but I was not frightened either. For most of my life, I had imagined the blank space where my first history should have been. Seeing even one name inside it felt less like discovering a ghost than hearing a door unlock somewhere far away. There was one other note in the ledger. Temporary nursery, East Passage. That evening, June was awake when I returned. I asked whether she remembered the name she had said. Maribel. June stared at me for a long time. Then she told me she had worked as a nursing aide at the old hospital when she was 19. She remembered a young woman named Maribel who came in alone during a snowstorm. The woman delivered a baby girl and left before morning. Left where? I asked. June shook her head. Nobody told us. Did she abandon the baby? That's what people said. The answer hurt in a way I had not prepared for. June reached for my hand. But I remember her asking to see you again before she left. I looked at her. You? She said softly. I wondered the moment you walked in. June did not know what happened to Maribel after that night. She remembered only that the infant stayed in the temporary nursery because the main nursery was full and the new building was still being organized. I asked whether the temporary nursery was in the passage between buildings. She nodded. Then she said something that changed the way I understood the hallway. That passage was strange even then. We used to joke that it took longer going one way than the other. The nurses had blamed fatigue, construction, poor lighting. Nobody had measured it. June smiled without humor. We were too busy. At 2:16, the corridor lengthened again. I was expecting it. I was also afraid of what I wanted from it. I had spent 42 years telling myself I did not need a beginning I could not verify. Now there was a window 40 yards from the lab offering me one. I walked until the nursery appeared. The 6th bassinet was still beneath the lamp. This time the card was turned toward the glass. I could read one word. Mara. My name was not Mara when I was born. My adoptive parents had chosen it. That should have been enough to make me walk away. Instead, I stayed. A shadow crossed the nursery wall. Not a person, just the soft change in light you see when someone passes a doorway outside the room. Then a woman's voice said something too faint for me to understand. I pressed closer to the glass. Behind me, the double doors to medical surgical opened. Kara called my name. Her voice sounded very far away. I turned. She was standing at the normal end of the corridor, but the distance between us looked enormous. She shouted that June's blood pressure had dropped. I looked back at the nursery. The bassinet was still there. For 1 second, I thought about staying. Not because I believed Maribel was in that room. I did not know what I believed. I only knew that whatever was happening had given me more of my history in one night than I had found in 3 decades. Then June's monitor alarm sounded faintly through the doors. I walked away from the window. With every few steps, the corridor shortened. By the time I reached Kara, the nursery was gone. June recovered after fluids and medication. She stayed at Red Basin for 4 more days. Before she was discharged, she wrote Maribel's last name on the back of a meal menu and gave it to me. I worked at Red Basin for another year. The service corridor stretched 3 more times, but I never saw the nursery again. Once, it added 12 steps. Once, 26. Once enough that Luis stopped his housekeeping cart and asked me why the doors looked so far away. That was the only time someone else admitted seeing it. The hospital renovated the laboratory in 2019. The service corridor was widened, the fluorescent fixtures were replaced, and the old west wall was opened for new plumbing. Tom called me when the contractors reached the section where the nursery window had appeared. Behind the drywall, they found a rectangle of wired glass. It had been sealed inside the wall for more than 40 years. There was no room behind it. Only concrete fill where the old passage had been demolished. Tom asked if I wanted the glass before they threw it away. I said no. I already had what I needed. I still keep June's meal menu in a folder with the copy of the old birth ledger. On the back, beneath Maribel's last name, there is a second line in faded pencil. I did not notice it until years later. It says, "The passage was longer when she left." The first scan order appeared 12 minutes before the patient reached the hospital. At the time, I assumed someone in the emergency department had entered it too early. That happened. Ambulance crews called ahead. Nurses prepared rooms before the patient arrived, and sometimes a doctor placed an order while the registration clerk was still building the chart. What bothered me was the name. I had never seen it before, and when I called downstairs, neither had anyone else. The order was for a head CT without contrast. The patient was listed as Samuel Dyer, age 61. The reason for the scan was a fall on wet steps. The time in the upper corner of the screen was 2:18 in the morning. At 2:30, an ambulance brought in Samuel Dyer, 61 years old, after he slipped on wet steps behind his house. I worked overnight in imaging at Bryan County Hospital in northern Maine for almost 11 years. It was a small place, 42 beds when I started and fewer by the time I left, with an emergency department that could be empty for hours and then fill all at once when weather turned bad. The hospital sat outside a town that had once depended on paper mills. By 2018, when this happened, the largest mill had been closed for years. The town was still there, but every autumn another storefront seemed to go dark. I was 45 that October and had been a radiologic technologist since my 20s. Most nights, I covered plain films and CT by myself. If something complicated came in, the on-call ultrasound tech or MRI tech could be reached from home. But after midnight, the imaging department usually belonged to me. I liked it that way. My marriage had ended the previous spring, and I had discovered that a quiet hospital was easier to sit with than a quiet apartment. My son, Evan, was 21 and living about an hour south. We weren't exactly estranged, but we had become careful with each other. He would answer when I called. I would ask how work was going. He would say fine. Then one of us would find a reason to end the conversation. There had never been one large argument between us, just years of small absences. I had worked through birthdays, school concerts, a graduation dinner, and more weekends than I could count. I always had a reason: mortgage payments, overtime, staffing shortages. Someone else's child was sick, someone else's car wouldn't start. Evan never told me he resented it. He didn't have to. The night Samuel Dyer came in, cold rain had been falling since sunset, the kind of rain that makes every road in northern Maine look blacker than it is. The emergency entrance reflected in the parking lot like a second building beneath the pavement. After I scanned Samuel, I asked Lauren, the charge nurse, when she had entered the order. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. I didn't. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. The emergency physician, Dr. Harlan, said he had entered it after examining Samuel, which would have been at least 15 minutes after the order first appeared on my work list. We checked the audit time. 2:18. Dr. Harlan frowned and said the server clock was probably wrong. That explanation made sense until we compared it with the medication system, registration timestamps, and my own login. Everything else matched the wall clocks within a minute. Only the CT order was early. Samuel's scan was normal. He went home before sunrise. By the end of my shift, the strange timestamp felt less important. Hospitals are full of clocks that disagree. 3 nights later, it happened again. At 1:46 in the morning, an order appeared for a chest CT on a woman named Rebecca Lane. The reason said shortness of breath after smoke exposure. There was no Rebecca Lane in the hospital. I called the emergency desk. Lauren answered. "No one by that name," she said. "Any ambulance coming?" "Not that I've heard." I almost deleted the order from my work list, but technologists couldn't actually delete physician orders. We could only mark them pending or contact the ordering provider. The provider field was blank. That was unusual enough that I took a picture of the screen with my phone. At 1:55, County Dispatch called to say an ambulance was bringing in 2 people from a small kitchen fire. One of them was Rebecca Lane. She reached the emergency department at 2:03, 17 minutes after her scan had been ordered. This time, Lauren came upstairs to look at the image on my phone. She stood beside me in the dim reading room while the computer fans hummed under the desk. "That wasn't there before she came in," she said. "I know." "Who placed it?" "No one." She tapped the blank provider field. "That's not possible." It was a phrase I heard several times that month. The hospital's information technology department was 2 people. One worked days, the other covered 3 facilities, and answered after-hours calls only when something had actually stopped working. Since nothing had stopped working, I waited until Monday morning to report it. The IT manager, Pete, pulled the audit logs while I stood behind him. The first 2 orders existed in the system exactly when I said they had appeared. But the system couldn't tell him who created them. Every normal order carried a user ID, a workstation ID, and a chain of timestamps showing when it was signed, modified, and acknowledged. These carried none of that. Pete leaned back in his chair. "Could be a database replication problem." I asked what that meant. He said, "It means I don't know yet." That answer was honest enough that I accepted it. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then the orders started coming more often. Never more than 1 in a night. Always between 1 and 4 in the morning. Always for a patient who had not arrived yet. The shortest gap was 7 minutes. The longest was 23. A wrist X-ray for a teenager injured unloading a truck. An abdominal CT for a man with kidney stones. A chest film for an elderly woman from a nursing home whose breathing had worsened during the night. The orders were never wrong. That was the part I found hardest to explain. They didn't predict disasters. Most of the patients were treated and sent home. One was admitted for observation. No one died. I began keeping a small notebook in the pocket of my scrub jacket. I wrote down the time each order appeared, the patient's arrival time, the weather, and who was working in the emergency department. I thought a pattern would make the whole thing less strange. Maybe the ambulance radio was feeding data into registration before anyone realized it. Maybe one nurse was placing orders under the wrong screen and forgetting about them. After 6 entries, the notebook only made things worse. The intervals were inconsistent. 7 minutes, 11, 23, 14. The patients came from different towns and different ambulance services. 2 arrived by private car, which ruled out dispatch as the source. On one of those nights, a man with a broken wrist walked through the emergency doors with his wife, while Lauren and I were still looking at the order that had appeared for him 9 minutes earlier. His wife hadn't called ahead. Registration confirmed it. I stopped writing after that. The information was also oddly limited. The order never said where the patient was coming from, or what would happen after the scan. It simply appeared as if someone, a few minutes ahead of us, had completed the ordinary clerical step we had not reached yet. Lauren began checking my screen when she came upstairs for coffee. She told 2 other nurses. One believed us, one didn't. The one who didn't stood in imaging for nearly an hour one night waiting for an order to appear. Nothing did. After that, she called it my ghost worklist. I didn't like the name. There was nothing ghostly about the orders. They were plain gray lines of text in the same font as everything else. That made them worse. Pete replaced my workstation. The orders continued. He moved me to a different network port. They continued. He changed my login permissions. They continued. Then he noticed something none of us had seen before. Each early order contained a destination code buried in the audit data. RDX4 point. Our active imaging workstations were numbered RDX7 through RDX12. Pete searched the inventory database. RDX4 had belonged to an old radiology terminal removed during a renovation in 2004. He found the disposal form in a scanned maintenance folder. The machine had been taken from a small film reading room on the basement level near the old morgue corridor. I knew the room. Everyone did. It had been locked for years and used for storage. That afternoon, before going home, Pete and I asked facilities to open it. There wasn't much inside. A broken wheelchair, 2 metal shelving units, a box of fluorescent tubes, several empty plastic bins with faded labels. The wall where the old terminal had stood was bare except for a square patch of paint that was slightly less yellow than the rest. No network cable, no electrical outlet, nothing that could still send an order. Pete took photographs and left. I stayed a minute longer. On the floor beneath the painted square, someone had scratched 4 short lines into the baseboard. Not words, just marks. 3 vertical lines and 1 diagonal line crossing them. I had no idea how old they were. I remember touching them with my thumb before I turned off the light. The next early order appeared 2 nights later. It was mine. I was sitting at the control desk finishing a report when the work list refreshed. 1 new line appeared at the top. Ellis, Evan. My son's full date of birth was underneath it. The exam was CT cervical spine without contrast. The reason read motor vehicle collision. For several seconds I did nothing. The clock in the corner of the monitor said 2:27. I checked my phone. 2:27. Evan worked evening inventory at a distribution warehouse outside Bangor. His shift ended at 2. He usually drove home on Route 15. The rain had turned to sleet an hour earlier. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. No answer. Lauren was at the desk downstairs when I reached the emergency department. She could tell something was wrong before I spoke. I showed her the screen on my phone. For once, she didn't ask who had entered the order. She only said, "Call him again." I did. This time Evan answered. There was road noise behind his voice. He sounded tired. "Dad? Where are you?" "Driving home." I asked him to pull over. He gave a short laugh and asked why. I couldn't tell him the truth without sounding insane, so I said the roads were icing and I needed him to stop somewhere for 10 minutes. He said he was almost home. I heard the old impatience in his voice, the same tone he had used when he was 16 and I called during one of the evenings I had promised to be there. For a second, I nearly let him go. That was my habit with Evan. I would reach toward the difficult conversation, feel resistance, then retreat into something practical. Work had taught me how to remain calm around blood, fractures, frightened families, and people receiving the worst news of their lives. It had never taught me how to tell my son I was afraid of losing him. So I told him exactly that. There was silence on the line. Then his turn signal clicked. He pulled into the parking lot of a closed hardware store. I stayed on the phone. We talked about nothing important at first: the weather, his shift, a supervisor he disliked. 9 minutes later, we heard sirens through his phone. They grew louder, then faded. Evan said they were heading north, the direction he had been driving. Lauren was listening from a few feet away. At 2:41, County Dispatch called the emergency department about a crash on Route 15. A pickup had lost control on black ice and crossed the center line. No one at the hospital could tell me what would have happened if Evan had kept driving. Neither can I. That uncertainty is important. The early order did not prove my son was supposed to be in that crash. It did not prove my phone call changed anything. All I know is that the order vanished from my work list at 2:44. It never entered his medical record. Pete searched every log the next morning and found no trace of it. I still had the picture on my phone. Evan came to see me that afternoon. We sat in the cafeteria with bad coffee between us. I didn't show him the photograph. I told him there had been a computer problem at work that made me think he might be in danger. He stared at me for a while, then asked why I had sounded so scared. I told him I had spent too many years believing there would always be another evening to call, another weekend to visit, another chance to keep a promise after I had broken the first one. He didn't forgive me in one conversation. That would have been easier than what actually happened. We simply started talking again, a little at a time. The early orders stopped after that night. 3 months later, Pete replaced the hospital's old radiology information system. The new software used different servers, different workstations, and a different work list entirely. RDX4 disappeared from the network inventory. I worked at Broward County for another 2 years. I never saw another order arrive early. When I left, Facilities was preparing to renovate the basement storage rooms. Pete remembered the old terminal and asked if I wanted to see the room before they cleared it. We went down together one morning after my last shift. The shelves had already been moved. The broken wheelchair was gone. The square of cleaner paint was still visible on the wall. So were the scratches on the baseboard. Except there were 5 now. 4 vertical lines, 1 diagonal line crossing them. Pete crouched beside them. I thought there were only 4. There were. He looked at me, waiting for an explanation. I didn't have one. Evan called while we were still in the room. We had plans to meet for breakfast. I answered before the second ring.